Crypto is falling further and further, and the question is, how can this potentially turn around? Because everybody is now super bearish, everybody expects the prices to fall further, but what could actually turn around the momentum? What are the potential scenarios? And I think there are basically three different ways of how this could turn around. The first way is that we see something similar to what happened after the Mt. Gox hack, after the Mt. Gox crash in 2015, right? We also went down by around 85% or so from the all-time high. And what actually helped to create this bottom over there was simply the flushing out of all the short-term speculation. So usually you've got these waves of excitement where a lot of new entrants enter Bitcoin, they buy crypto and they push up the price. And then after a certain period of time, when there's been enough media attention, then the growth of these short-term speculators halts to a certain degree, right? Everybody that's interested has already bought in. And that's then when the price tends to decline again. There isn't enough new money entering the space for those short-term rises. And that's then when a lot of those short-term speculators, they completely exit the market, helping to crash the price, helping to depress it. But there are also those long-term investors, right? The people that dollar cost average into Bitcoin and they buy every month. They basically use Bitcoin as a savings vehicle, even though it's that volatile, right? They believe in the long-term viability of crypto and of Bitcoin. And so once these short-term speculators get flushed out enough and the fraction of long-term holders increases further and further, then they in the end have more impact on the price. Meaning the dollar cost averaging makes the circulating supply of Bitcoin smaller and smaller, right? A lot of the Bitcoin is then held in those hardware wallets. It's not directly held on the exchanges. And so just a little bit of extra demand can then push up the price again. So that's the first scenario. And when we actually look at the current statistics, at the on-chain statistics, we can already see that there's quite a lot of long-term holders. It's actually as high as it has ever been. I think around 65% or so of all of Bitcoin has not moved in the last year. And that's pretty much an all-time high. Before we saw, I think it was around 55% or so, which was the highest before the bull market from the Corona crash to the 67K, was around 55%. And then you see that these long-term holders during a rally, they sell off. But having a high percentage of Bitcoin held in long-term holders' wallets is positive. And that's the first scenario. But what that means is also that the bottom is unlikely to form directly, right? The bottom won't be like a V-shaped recovery. It will rather be like U-shaped. Slowly and slowly are we going to stabilize and then increase, because these long-term investors, the dollar cost averagers, they're not like betting a lot all at once, right? They're just slowly buying in, meaning the recovery of the price will also be relatively slowly. So that's the first scenario. The second scenario, how we could exit this bear market and get back into a bull market, is a black swan event that creates a lot of new attention. So in a similar way, how the Corona crash reduced the Bitcoin price in a single day by around 40%, right? That's 40 in a single day. When something like this happens, a lot of people talk about crypto, and a lot of people take that opportunity as a fire sale, right? They see this, wow, Bitcoin is now on a discount, let's buy in. There's a lot of forced liquidation happening, a lot of forced selling. So let's just take opportunity of these depressed prices. When the price crashes very, very quickly, that's very often an opportunity to turn around. That's different to when the price just goes down slowly and slowly. There's not a lot of attention around it. People don't really care. But when it really crashes quickly, then that's like an event that creates attention and new entrants. And that's then when instead of a U-shaped recovery, we get these V-shaped recoveries where we have these depressed prices only for a very short period of time. So when something like this happens, that's great, right? But you have to be able to then go against the masses, because then the voices will be the loudest that say that Bitcoin is going to zero and that it has failed and that it's not going anywhere, and that the whole project won't really continue in any significant way. So that's then where you need to have the highest conviction. For the dollar cost averagers, when you've already created some kind of a floor and Bitcoin doesn't drop that quickly anymore, it's not that hard to bet against the overall masses because there's simply just no attention. But when there's a lot of attention and it's all negative attention, then it's actually pretty hard. And you also have to bet pretty heavily because these depressed prices don't happen for a long time. So what could trigger such a black swan, right? The definition of a black swan in the end is that we don't really know, right? It's a black swan, it's an event that's unforeseen. But what kind of ideas could we have? So the first one is probably some kind of escalation in the Ukraine war. Something like this could happen. Nobody knows. Another thing that could happen is a further outbreak of the monkeypox, right? Maybe we see something similar to Corona 2.0. Corona was already somehow foreseen. It was around for quite a while in China before it actually went to the West and then created this global issue. Monkeypox is also relatively small still, but growing quickly. So who knows? Maybe that's the next black swan. Maybe it's something completely different. Maybe it's a deleveraging event that we don't anticipate yet. So yeah, something like this, when the overall global financial markets, they suddenly start crashing a lot and take crypto with it. That could be scenario 2, where then when we get all this forced liquidation, we then get the V-shaped recovery because of that fire sale. So that's possibility number 2. And the last possibility, and I think that scenario is actually the least likely that this happens first, is a reversal of the current interest rate policy of the Federal Reserve. So currently the story is that the prices, the global asset prices, so stocks and property and crypto, they're all going down because interest rates go up. It's harder to borrow money. Liquidity isn't flowing around that freely anymore, and so prices go down. And the contra idea around this would then be, okay, when there's monetary easing again, when the interest rates go down, when the balance sheet is expanding again, the Fed balance sheet, then we should see rising prices again. But I think it's unlikely that we'll see that reversal very quickly, because what is actually the Federal Reserve balancing here? What would turn the opinion around? What would turn this course around? It's probably the unemployment rate, because these are the kind of two major things that the Fed has to balance. It's on the one hand the inflation rate, it has to fight inflation, but it also has to look at unemployment. And when the employment rate or the unemployment rate is very, very high, then they have to ease, right? They have to get as much employment as possible. So there's two goals. And when we currently look at the unemployment rates, of course, in the cryptocurrency market and in the tech sector, there isn't as much hiring anymore. But in the global economy, they're still pretty close to full employment right now. So the unemployment rate is very, very low. So there isn't a lot of pressure to the Fed to actually raise the rates. When asset prices go down, the Fed doesn't really care. They only care when the unemployment rate goes up. And so when will this materialize? When will we actually see the unemployment rate rising? It's really hard to say, right? Currently it's very, very low, and it doesn't look like it's turning around that quickly. So I wouldn't bet on that scenario first. If that happens, then we're probably further in a bear market in the asset prices for, I don't know, another 6 months or 12 months. Who knows? I think it's more likely that we will either see a black swan event where we again get a big crash promoted by the media that causes a lot of panic selling, or we will simply see a floor, a further decoupling of crypto and traditional markets simply because of dollar cost averagers. It currently looks like crypto gets more and more into the hands of the small people, right? When we look at the number of wallets that hold at least one Bitcoin, so the relatively smallish retail wallets, that number is increasing. So it even went up during this crash. So the small guys were the ones that were dollar cost averaging, that were accumulating Bitcoin. It was not necessarily the institutional investors. Meaning when there's small investors in crypto, they're unlikely to trade the correlation between traditional markets and crypto markets as much as institutional people do, right? The institutionals, they constantly balance out their portfolio, they trade the volatility across asset classes. The regular retail guy doesn't do this. So when Bitcoin moves more into the retail crowd, I think a further decoupling might happen. And that's, I think, the ideal scenario. So if we just get the U-shaped recovery, we just continue at this 20K level for a while, then we move to 22K, then to 24, maybe again to 22, then to 26, and this takes a course over several months. That's probably the healthiest way, because then we can still DCA in for a prolonged period of time. We can take advantage of these low prices, and then when the next rally actually comes, because the supply is dried up enough, it's enough in these long-term holder wallets, and the price has risen enough to then actually create a tension again, that's then where we can get most profit from this. I think that's a better scenario for us. That's at least a scenario I'm wishing for, than if we see this sudden Corona-like black swan crash. Because then you have to really be ready to put in a lot of money in a very short period of time, in just a few days. And few people are ready to do this, especially when there's all this negativity flowing around. So let's see what will materialize. If it's just a small U-shaped bottoming out, if it's a crash, or if it's a reversal of the Fed. One of those things, I think, is likely going to create the next bull run. Maybe it's some kind of a combination of all of these, but there will be one predominant narrative that will drive this, and I think it's one of those three. So let's see, and hope you also continue to happily dollar cost average in while we are, comparatively speaking, at pretty depressed prices. Okay, hope you're also gonna watch this video over here. It's another discussion on the current bear market. Thanks for watching this video, and see you in that video. Bye bye.